it's a tragedy that these families, this community, has to endure anything so bad is that number is just outrageous. The thing that comes to my mind is that for some reason there's no purpose. I mean, when you have a purpose in your life, a lot of things are clear. You have a direction, you have goals, short and long-term goals. So the only understanding that I can come to is that these young people, especially these young people, just have no purpose. And with no purpose, there's no guidance. And so there's an old saying that says, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. And that's what I see these young people. I mean, as bad as it was back in the 80s with the gangs, at least there was a so-called leader or some captain or lieutenant within the gang that had some sway over the other members of the gang that could say, no, we're going to stop here. We're not going to cross this boundary. We're not going to go that far. But now it's just, there's no rhyme or reason. It's just willy-nilly, just do whatever.
And that's a refrain I've heard a lot lately, Professor. Obviously, I wasn't here in the 80s, but I lived in a city that was hit by the crack wars and the gang epidemic that arose around it. So many people that were here in the 80s and stuff say, this is so much different, this is so much more violent, and it doesn't seem to have an explanation.
No. Like I say, during the 80s, when there was a influx of Crips and Bloods into the area, and the Crips and Bloods were at odds with each other, they would have their basic gang wars and fighting, you could see, okay, this is a side, and if you could convince one side to say, okay, fine, we're going to call a truce, we're not going to do this, then you had some levity. But now there's no, like I said, there's no rhyme and no reason. Who do you go to? Somebody said that one of the local ministers said, let's go to them and see what they want. Who are them? Where do you start? Do you go to each household and find young men and say, what is it that you want? So it's just very difficult to deal with these times, very difficult.
Do you think we should also look at this at some perspective, at this being a public health issue, when we're seeing people die at such a high rate at this point?
Well, I guess you could look at it from that standpoint. I really don't see a serious connection between the number of homicides and the type of homicides that are occurring in Shreveport area with necessarily economics and culture and etc. It's as if there's a virus other than the coronavirus that has hit, and these young people are just being swept in by it and susceptible to it, and they just, there was an instance where a young man, there were several people waiting in a convenience store in the Moortown area, and a young man walked in the door and just went to the front of the line, and they were telling him, no, you can't just go to the front of the line, and so the argument ensued, and they broke the two up that were arguing, and the guy that just walked in the store pulled his gun, shot a guy in the head, and walked out. There's no rhyme or reason for that. I mean, there's no cultural or economic situation. That's just blatant disrespect for someone's life.
Well, let me ask you, how do you attack a virus like that you don't really know what the rhyme or reason or cause or root of it is at this point?
That's a good question, and I wish I had the answer. I really do. There's a lot of serious prayer that's going on. And the only conclusion I can come to is, unless there is a true divine intervention, this plague or this virus that we're experiencing, especially with the young people, is just going to have to run its course. Because there's no way you can attack it. I mean, there's no medicine, there's no different ways that you can look at it. I mean, it's like a virus.
And let me ask you this, I applaud the city because at least they're looking at some ways now to do kind of a twofold thing, which is solve the crimes more, going to this real crime time center that we saw yesterday, and also hoping that it could have some type of deterrent effect. If someone who's, is at least, you probably know the heat of the moment a homicide or gun violent instance, that may not stop. But if it's somebody's thinking, considering it, maybe they know if it's potential that this could get caught on camera and they could get caught, they won't do it. Do you think there's a possibility that something like this, a use of technology, that we have more cameras recording in the city and real-time access to the police could serve as some kind of deterrent?
I sincerely hope so. I sincerely hope so. But when you're dealing with irrational, just spur of the moment type of incidents, the one I described in Motown, I mean, what cameras and even the guy that was captured and stuff, it hasn't deterred any other people from, engaging in that type of activity. So it's, like I say, it's kind of like a catch-22 between a rock and a hard place. And we do what we can. That's all we can do. We do what we can. And like I say, unless there's a divine intervention, we're in a real pickle here for a while.
And Professor, let me ask you this last question. I also interviewed the head of emergency medicine at LSUS, and she broke down the numbers to me, but overwhelmingly, the people that we have seen in the course of, let's just say, the past 5 years, because that's kind of where I'm focusing on, although we could go back further, are predominantly young, from the juvenile age to the early 20s, male and African American. So this is a virus that in some regards, I hate to fall back on phrase, but is discriminating. Do you think, but we have, do we worry, and I do, that there's a segment of our population or city that just shrugs their shoulders and put their hands up, that they feel like, look, this problem doesn't affect me because it's only affecting a subset of a population of a city?
Well, if you'll allow me, I'll speak from a former police standpoint. When you reach a point when a crime is committed and there are witnesses that can help you solve that crime and get the bad guy off the street, and they refuse to cooperate, they don't want to get involved, it's not their fight, it's not their business, then what do? And when the young people see that, from those folk, and they go like, well, if they don't care, right? John killed Joe. Everybody knows that John killed Joe, but nobody will say, hey, John did it. So what is it? Silence gives consent. And so that's the bad side of it. Like I say, from a police standpoint, that's what I see.
And how demoralizing is that for the men and the women in blue and homicide detectives that go to the scene and know somebody knows John killed Joe, but nobody will point the finger at John to give him the evidence?
Bodies in the street. Every night, bodies in the street. Nobody knows anything. Nobody will say anything. Offering rewards through Crime Stoppers, nothing. So, if no one cares, why should I care? No one cares. And the young people see that. And they take that cavalier attitude and nobody cares. What is a life worth? Nothing. And so that's what we play with. Like I say, it's a virus.